all of that and more with our friend at Politico reporter Jessica Piper. She joins me. Jessica, good to see you. I hope you had a good weekend. Let's kind of dive right in here. We've made some graphics ourselves here at LiveNOW to kind of discuss all of these battleground state polls in the New York Times and Siena College they put together. It seems like every time Siena College poll that comes out, everyone talks about it because it has so much news to get to here. All right, so we're going to put this up. We're going to get you to respond to some of these as well here. So in Arizona, Trump up 49, Biden up, or there at 42 rather. Of course, Biden won Arizona last cycle. We also have other battleground states as well. Georgia, Trump up on Biden, 49 to 39, 10 percentage points there. Biden, of course, we know, won Georgia in 2020. Other states like Michigan as well, Trump at 49, Biden at 42. And Biden, of course, won the state of Michigan in 2020 by more than 100,000 votes. We have other states as well in this poll, including there, you see Pennsylvania, Trump at 47, Biden at 44. So just 3 percentage points there. Of course, Biden won Pennsylvania in 2020 as well. And then we have, you see there, Michigan 50, or excuse me, no, we have Michigan there, Trump at 50, Biden at 38. That is such a wide margin there. And I believe we have Wisconsin. Oh, let's go to Nevada. We have Nevada, Trump at 50, Biden at 38. And then we have, lastly, Wisconsin there. This is the only state Biden is up in this poll to Trump, 47 to 45 there. So, Jessica, your overall thoughts, do we look into these polls too much? Are they a bellwether of what's to come in November? Or should we just see them in isolation? They're just a snapshot in time. How should we kind of characterize this and interpret this?
Well, look, I think any campaign would tell you, off the record, they would rather be up in the polls than down in the polls. And, campaigns are very quick to tout when a poll comes out in their favor. And when a poll comes out that's not in their favor, they're quick to say, that's just one poll, that's just one snapshot, don't read too much into it. And the truth is somewhere in between, right? It's true, these polls reflect how voters are feeling today, right? And the election is not until November. There's a lot of things that could happen between now and then. That could affect how voters, cast their ballots, right? So we should, keep in mind this is a snapshot in time. But even with that, it's a snapshot that still means something. So, don't ignore the polls. Don't expect that those will be the exact margins in November. That the truth is a lot more complicated than that.
So, of course, the split screen of this is, former President Trump is sitting in a courtroom in Lower Manhattan. And at the end of court today, he kind of implicitly commented on this very poll. He said, we're still doing well in the polls despite the trial here. Do you think that's reflected in some of this?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. I mean, I think one thing we see with these polls is consistency. If you compare them to the last New York Times Siena poll, there isn't a lot of change. And that last poll was in November, so that's quite a few months. A lot has happened since then. Not just Trump going on trial, but the Biden campaign really ramping up its, advertising and that sort of thing. Some good economic indicators, and it doesn't seem to have made a dent in the polls. Yeah. So obviously, there's still a lot that could happen. Trump's on trial right now. He could be convicted. He could be acquitted. Either of those outcomes could affect the polls. Trump's going to campaign a lot more. Biden's going to campaign a lot more. But it is the case that what we've seen over the last few months doesn't seem to have moved the needle a lot.
Jessica, I want to talk about some of the key demographics, the constituencies that were, measured in this poll. Some of the respondents, you're seeing Trump make very large gains, not only with young voters, youth voters, but also Hispanics and black voters as well here. I saw a status, or at least a data point in this poll that said the margin for Trump amongst black voters is the highest it has been since Eisenhower was president in the 50s here. How do we make sense of this? Where do we attribute this growing share of these voter bases that are largely have been in Democratic corners for decades?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think one thing to keep in mind is that, if you take black voters as an example, the baseline is very low, right? Black voters often go more than 90% for Democrats. And so that gives Republicans and former President Trump in this case a lot of room to grow. And so what we've seen in other surveys is that Black voters, Hispanic voters express like a lot of the same discontent as white voters, being concerned about President Joe Biden's age, being concerned about the economy, being unhappy with inflation. And it's the case that, those concerns are driving, a little bit of movement towards Republicans. And when you're starting from a group where the baseline is so low for Republicans, then, 8% moving over, that's nearly a doubling.
No, that's such a good point, too. It's all about, the perspective and where you start in the polling with some of these key demographic groups as well. But if you're someone in the Biden campaign hierarchy, if you're a Democratic operative, if you're a Democratic member of Congress and you're looking at some of this, what are you thinking? What are you telling your allies and your friends about how this might go over in November? Are you worried if you were them? You hear that phrase a lot, that they're bedwetting, so to speak, and that their pants are on fire here over some of this. Do you think that's legitimate right now for them?
Yeah, I think, look, Democrats would always rather be up in a poll. I think one thing that's really interesting about this poll that we haven't discussed yet is that in 4 of the states where they also polled Senate races, right? Pennsylvania, Arizona being among those, Wisconsin, another one. The Democratic Senate candidates were in fact winning. Now that was also within the margin of error. We should keep in mind, kind of all these numbers should have a plus or minus 3. But that can either mean one of two things, right? It can mean that Biden has this uniquely unpopular brand and that other Democrats are going to do well and maybe Biden can catch up to that. Or the flip side is that, Republican down ballot actually have a lot more room to grow if they can just tie these candidates closer to Biden. So you can spin that fact either way you want it. Certainly from Democrats we're hearing, well, if you look how well Democratic Senate candidates are doing, Biden can match that with some campaigning. And so that might be the positive way Democrats can look at it and, maybe a roadmap for how they're going to campaign.
Okay, because I think that's so interesting because we saw a lot of ticket splitting. That's this phenomenon there. Back in 2022 in the midterms for Republicans, specifically, you had a lot of Republicans essentially voting for these down ballot candidates, but also including some of these Democratic candidates in there as well. So it's going to be interesting to see on the flip side of that, whether we're going to see that with President Biden, or will Democrats kind of hold their nose and vote straight ticket down the line here, straight party rather. All right, lastly, Jessica, while we have you, we want to talk about, though, the third party candidates, the independent candidates, possible spoilers like Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Cornel West, Jill Stein. Where do they size up in this poll here?
Yeah, in this poll, I think only Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was included. And the pollsters found that he was drawing roughly equally. Again, there's a margin of error with all of this, but from Biden and Trump. So, people were asked about all 3 candidates, and then they were asked about just a head-to-head matchup between Biden and Trump. Something to keep in mind is that it's not clear whether Kennedy or the other candidates you mentioned is going to be on the ballot in every swing state. Kennedy, for now, is on the ballot in Michigan. He's trying to get on the ballot in the other states, and some of those deadlines are still months out, so we won't know for a little while. But it's really interesting. Kennedy has talked about the idea that he could be a spoiler for both candidates, right? You can draw some Trump voters and some Biden voters, and I think this polling and some other polling that we've seen, previously backs up that notion.
Okay, but I've also been reading and seeing, some data points to suggest that now Republicans are growing even more concerned, Republican operatives, campaign officials and consultants, about RFK Jr.'s kind of growing popularity amongst portions of their base. And so, it seems like I'm asking this question every week when we bring political reporters on like yourself. Who draws from who the most? Is RFK Jr. more detrimental to Biden or more detrimental to Trump? And it doesn't seem like we have a really good answer on that question yet. Will we? Or do we have to wait until November?
Well, I think it's a good example of how things can actually change over time. When we first saw RFK Jr. enter the race as an independent, frankly, I think it was Democrats who were more scared. Obviously, the name Kennedy carries a lot of weight in Democratic politics. And, we saw the Democratic National Committee, for example, has a few staff members who are, a large part of their role is pointing out things that Robert F. Kennedy does that, Democratic voters won't like. And they were devoting a lot of resources to his campaign. They've also sought legal challenges against him. So at the beginning, it seemed like Democrats were more concerned. And I think what we've seen since then is there's been a shift that Republicans have realized, oh, wait, this actually could be a threat to Trump's candidacy, too. And I think we're going to see a lot of both sides kind of trying to portray RFK as a candidate who is not appealing to their base and who is appealing to the other party's base. Democrats are hoping that voters who might otherwise vote for Trump vote for RFK instead, and that, Biden voters all come home to Biden, right? And Republicans are hoping that voters who might be never Trump voters cast their ballots for RFK instead of Biden. So I think we're going to see a lot of push and pull on this issue over time, and it's really hard to say where it'll all come down, in November.
Yeah, I just want to put up the numbers in the poll for RFK Jr. So he's polling at about 10% in these 5 battleground states of Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. You can see them there. Arizona at 10%, Pennsylvania at 10%, Wisconsin and Michigan at 9%, Georgia at 9%, Nevada at 12%. I mean, that is a very sizable margin for a third-party candidate who's not even on the ballot in some of those states. I just want to make that point because I think it's important. I mean, they have their work cut out for them, the RFK Jr. campaign, and getting ballot access here. And we're about to show our viewers, because we're told there's a live kind of campaign rally happening in Austin, Texas today, so everyone can kind of stay tuned for that if you want to hear RFK Jr. and his running mate, Nicole Shanahan, here. But if you're RFK Jr. or you're an RFK Jr. fan and you want to vote for them, are those good numbers for them?
Well, I think it does depend on, what is RFK Jr.'s objective in this race, right? If you're actually trying to be president, you need to get on the ballot in every state, which, his campaign hasn't done yet. It's too early to say whether they will. And you need to do a lot better than 10%. And, you have to convince voters that you're a viable candidate, right? Because some of those 10% might theoretically want to vote for RFK, but they also might be worried about him being a spoiler.
Right.
And so if RFK Jr.'s goal is to, make some headlines and, make the Trump and Biden campaigns worried, he's definitely doing that with those numbers, but those aren't numbers that are going to make him the next president of the United States.
All right, Jessica Piper, as always, we can't thank you enough. Thanks for talking politics with us. Always fun. We'll talk soon.
Sounds great. Thanks for having me.